Hello, occupational therapy students. This is Michelle, and this is the first of a series of e-lectures on cognitive and perceptual interventions. Before you complete these slides and have a look at them, I strongly suggest that you read your green textbook as well as Radomski in terms of cognitive intervention as prescribed, and use these as a useful resource while navigating through these slides. I also have supplied a set of slides which basically come from chapter 24 of Radomski from this textbook, and they highlight the content in that textbook, which might help with your reading and is where some of the content in these slides comes from as well. The objectives for this set of e-lectures is that you can actually identify intervention techniques for both cognitive and perceptual impairments, as well as being able to describe, select, apply, and then evaluate the relevance of these cognitive and perceptual strategies for clients for the variety of occupational performance issues. Fairly straightforward, I think. So I have already said you're going to be watching this video and the other videos, read the 2 chapters, use the slides provided, and that'll prepare you very well for in class. In class, we're going to actually practically design some interventions, try and put together some ideas of what this could look like in practice. This will involve group learning within our groups that are tables and between groups, and then hopefully there'll be some review of the group work, and whatever we discuss here, there'll be a similar type of question in the final exam. So it's a really good idea to pay attention this week. I've also provided in the slides a variety of the OCC311 slides about memory and executive function, and I advise that you have a look at them as well. So what is cognition? Cognition is mental processes that include thinking, perceiving, feeling, recognizing, remembering, problem solving, knowing, sensing, learning, judging, and metacognition. This is quite a mouthful. There's lots in there, but as you can imagine, really important for all of our clients. Cognition is the real thinking stuff. That stuff that's more abstract and possibly not as easy to conceptualize as muscle strength, range of motion, and the other physical conditions. We're thinking more of the abstract now. What is perception? Perception is the ability to organize and interpret sensory information. That's a nice, simple definition. It's not that simple because when we look at perception, we also have to think about the interaction of cognition and perception. So to actually think and to have cognition, we have to perceive correctly. And to perceive correctly, we have to see correctly. So a lot of the content we discussed today, particularly from a perception point of view, will overlap with what we've done in the previous week when we looked at vision and optimizing visual performance. So perception, as I've already said, interacts or corresponds to some of the topics we discussed in vision in week 4. In terms of perception, some of the important concepts in vision that are in perception that are important to know are those of visual discrimination. So people who work in this area will differentiate between specific types of visual perception, and they talk about form discrimination. That's the ability to actually tell what the shape of something is or the color of something is, or even recognize it when it changes shape, color, position. Depth perception, being able to tell the depth of something. Figure ground, being able to determine the socks from the background. So if the socks are lying on the bed and they're both white, someone might have figure ground issues and have a problem actually trying to work out where the socks are relative to the bed. Spatial relations is understanding how one thing lies next to each other. So being able to grab a bottle without overshooting or undershooting, so actually understanding the spatial relations. You can understand how depth perception fits in with that as well. And then topographical orientation is how things lie in relation to each other. So these are all sort of concepts within perception, and they're all areas that our clients may have issues with. So someone might have an issue with form discrimination, or with figure ground, or with depth perception. And from an intervention perspective, we might target one of those things specifically as a foundational skill. The textbook also covers body scheme disorders, which is quite an interesting area because it sounds quite weird and wacky that people could go without some kind of sense of their own body. Some somatognosia is the inability to recognize your own body, so you don't recognize your own hand as your hand. More common is probably unilateral body neglect, which we've also talked about last week or before when we talked about vision and optimizing visual performance, because a unilateral body neglect is relatively common with a right hemispheric injury. So there's normally a left neglect, and that's where the brain or the person is actually not actually aware of one half of their body, or might have an inattention to one side of their body. The inattention to one side of the body may then manifest as the unilateral body neglect. So they actually neglect that part of their body or aren't aware of that, won't acknowledge that side of their body to be part of themselves. and the inability to differentiate between left and right, the left-right discrimination, and there are other agnosias. But in honesty, in clinical practice, we don't see that many body scheme disorders, that many somatic nosias or other agnosias. And the truth is that it's more likely that you're going to see something like a unilateral body neglect, which is normally associated with an inattention. What interventions do we use for countering these disorders? They are the same as a lot of the interventions we're going to mention on the other slides. Using functional tasks, getting back to doing things everyone does every day, and that to me is the base of all occupational therapy. We have to grade in terms of getting people to integrate their body parts into their body. We might use cueing, we might use chaining in terms of successful completion of tasks, and quite often there might be hand over hand, because if they aren't aware of their own body parts, or you sometimes actually have to physically guide them so that they can integrate those parts into whatever they're doing every day. In terms of perception, there's some general principles for techniques for perception, and this goes for all perception interventions. So we're trying to assist someone who has perceptual difficulties. We're going to use cueing, and that means we're going to use maybe auditory cueing, visual cueing, or physical cueing. And that will always grade. So we'll grade the type of cueing. So if we use a little bit or a lot, or if we're using auditory or physical, we'll grade the quantity, the quality, and the variety. And that depends on the client's specific presentation in terms of what will work for them. We might chain backwards and forwards, as I've mentioned before, just to ensure that a task can be started or completed. We might remediate and compensate, which means sometimes we're trying to help someone get better or improve their perception, and other stages we're just acknowledging that this is an issue and therefore compensating for it. Most important with all of these perceptual issues and also cognitive issues is we have to allow time for processing and for response. So for most people, this really means that we have the urge to get someone to move on and to help them. But with our clients, we really need to let them think through things and give an opportunity for them to actually work out if there's really an issue there. Is it just a speed of processing issue, or do they actually really have a problem?